This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I want to read a nice email that came in. Michael, your podcasts continue to be a wealth of education, entertainment, and enlightenment, and I can't thank you enough. I don't think people really appreciate the value that you are providing. I've spent approximately $4,000 on your products, and I feel like there is more than the value in the podcast alone, and I get those for free. If you're ever in Toronto or Miami, we split our time. Let me know so I can buy you a drink. All the best, Simon. Simon, thank you for those kind words. But of course, this podcast would not be very good unless I had some fantastic guests. It makes my job extremely easy to literally, not figuratively, literally have some of the brightest people on the planet on my show. Now, some people might say, I have really smart people, I have really accomplished people on my show, but I think I've got them beat. The list of guests that have appeared on the Trend Following podcast are just, I'm lucky. I'm extremely lucky. So Simon, thank you for those kind words. And building on Simon's very kind words, it gets me thinking about reviews. And that's part of the nasty process of running a podcast. In today's 2015 world, social proof means something. It helps to land guests. If you like this podcast, do me a big favor. Go to covel.com, covel.com/iTunes. It will forward you to my iTunes page at Apple. You can write a review. It's really simple. Say something good, say something bad. Rip the hell out of me. Go write a review. Please. Look, there's the please. For your time, for your effort. I will send you a Trend Following CD of extras. Simply send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the CD right away. My guest today is Charles Faulkner. Well, he's not really my guest today. He's not live today. I'm not asking him questions today. Like my recent Tom Basso episode, this is an excerpt of Charles that is really intriguing. Charles giving a seminar, and I am excerpting part of that seminar, to students that are interested in neuro-linguistic programming. I'm not here to teach about NLP today. That's not my point. But the way that Charles talks, the way that he thinks, the way that he explains is useful for all of us. If you have a goal, if you want a goal, if you want to think about how to even get to the goal, Charles is digging into that very topic in this excerpt that I'm going to play today. For those of you not familiar with Charles Faulkner, he was originally featured in Jack Schwager's The New Market Wizards. He has studied and worked with some of the best traders in the world. He's also appeared on this podcast 5 times. That would be episode 303, episode 187, episode 117, episode 51, and episode 3. I can safely say I have probably received more positive feedback about Charles Faulkner's appearances on this podcast versus any other guest. There's a soothing quality, a soothing nature to Charles, and he seemingly always comes at his world from a perspective that you don't see coming. I love that about him. I still remember meeting Charles Faulkner for the first time. I was with Ed Seykota and Charles Faulkner in the Virgin Islands a long time ago. I remember interviewing Charles Faulkner one time at Cal Ripken's minor league baseball stadium in Aberdeen, Maryland. I believe it's in Aberdeen, right up 95. Gorgeous stadium. It just so happened when I was doing my film years ago, that's where we had to meet given this crazy schedule. And I remember interviewing Charles. I mean, that's not the only time I've talked to Charles, but I remember interviewing him in some kind of crazy space overlooking the field. This excerpt I'm going to play is all about goals. There's no one listening to this podcast that does not have to think about goals, how to set the goal, how to imagine the goal, how to get to the goal. There's a reason that Charles was in Jack Schwager's New Market Wizards. There's a reason that he's been close friends with Ed Sekoto for all these years. I hope you enjoy this great excerpt with Charles Faulkner.
You go to a book like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, who claimed it's a model of successful people. Now, his idea of successful people were robber barons. Robin bearers, that too. They were robber barons. So they were Standard Oil, Rockefeller. They were Carnegie, or as we now say, Carnegie. It was Pullman and the old Pullman trains. It was Gates. No, that comes later. So there were these people that he modeled. When he asked them about their goals, he said they had goals that were above and beyond their everyday concerns. Now, can you hear that now? The neurolinguistics of that. And we all make goals, but if you have a goal that's above and beyond lunch, that's above and beyond put the telephone bill in the mail, that's above and beyond pick up the kids from school. You still have those goals. You still do those things, right? Just because you have big goals doesn't mean you don't, you have a life, right? Both. Okay. Now, some people have it like, I'm too important to pick my kids at school. This goes to the English. There's this thing, yes, well, I decide the important things in the family. I decide when we go to war, who will be the prime minister. My wife decides the minor things, how many children we'll have, where we'll live. Yeah, it's just, people get confused about this. I mean, you have these everyday concerns, and then what gives your life direction? Sometimes it's called purpose. That sense of above and beyond your everyday concerns. Now, the other thing that we now realize is that when Napoleon Hill was writing this, he said they had big goals. Now, this is confusing big content with big picture. Because they would control the oil industry, control the finance markets of America, control the software on every desk. Now, the thing is, these are big goals. And it makes the world very interesting for people to have big goals. It's also, in terms of an orienting response, very possible to take a simpler goal, to take something that people don't think is grand but could make a huge difference, about utilizing these skills, and when you greet people, when you interact with people, to make it a covenant of good communication, to bring your best to that, to realize that conflict is the nature of another model of the world and an opportunity to learn. To realize that other people are not only there for fun and reproduction, they're also there to learn other patterns from. And you can make that goal, but that goal doesn't seem as grandiose as controlling the oil industry or geopolitics. But if you were somebody, and Gandhi was somebody who had both of those, who would have the big goal of freeing a country, but he also had a goal which was a person to a person. And in that, you can make that goal big in your mind to remind you about the importance of your children to you and how you want to interact with them, especially when they turn into monsters called teenagers. Because this too shall pass. And they actually need a lot of help at that point. And you can hold that goal of two people interacting. And you can hold that large in the same way that you can hold controlling an industry large. Because the brain don't know the difference. Right? If it's above and beyond your everyday concerns, it can direct your attention. Also, you want to be careful because you make it too big, it's bigger than the both of us. Curious thing when you begin to do this modeling is that we found Bandler for a while was doing these seminars. Make your goal 40 feet across, and Technicolor and 3D. And then behind you, you have 400 black singers. These are these ladies. They have them in Chicago, the choirs, you've seen them, Channel 25, and they're going, you got your goal! And this can be very motivating. It was discovered, though, that some people do that, and it's tremendously motivating. Other people go, it's too big. And actually bringing it down to earth, some people found it made that goal so much easier to do. Instead of it being something that was up there, it was like, I could do that. And we hear this again in the language, bringing something down to earth. And yet whoever thought of connecting the way we talked about things with the way we represent things with the way that we can react, that we can change, that we can create our lives. As Bandler said, see what I mean? 2,000 years of psychology, nobody noticed that. Not a lot of people on the ball. What we got to realize here is that in our world, all right, I'm going to back up here. You know about mirror neurons, right? Oh, you don't?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right. There's been wondering for some time now if seeing stuff affects what you think about. In other words, does television cause violence? Does children getting bad role models? How come some kids, they have bad role models, they turn out great, other kids, turn out, what is all this? There's been much debate about this, but the fix is in. That the neurology has now been verified. There's a set of neurons back here, not just in me. They're called mirror, like looking in a mirror. This is very bizarre because it goes directly to the idea of mirroring, something that we do in NLP. And the mirror neurons are that when you see something, a part of your brain, if it's primate, hi, friendly primate, that's us. If it's another person doing it, we do that on the inside. It's literally like there's a little person in there, that you do those behaviors. Children make an immediate translation from these neurons, it's right near the hypothalamus, into the long muscle groups. So when kids see other kids doing stuff, there actually is a physical tendency to do it. It is monkey see, monkey do. And so when you ask your teenager, well, if everybody drove off a cliff, would you? They're going, maybe. because it's one of the learnings that you have through childhood is you learn to inhibit the long muscle groups. That is, you see somebody else do something, like jumping off a high dive or something, and in your brain you're jumping off the high dive, and then you go, no, but you could. And that's why in NLP again, and Erickson saw this long before, when you'd see that, the micro muscle movements. When people would be, you were doing the stuff and you relaxed people, you told them a story, and you watch people start to do the story a little bit. Yes, well, that's because they're inside imagining it's activating the muscles. Yeah, as I say, the fix is in. So you're watching television, yes. The brain doesn't know that if you put a black plastic strip around it or fake mahogany, that it's not real. On the other hand, this is why couch potatoes can sit there with the beer and watch the Olympics, and watch somebody go, and they go, I could do that. Because they did in their head. They go, that was easy. Spin it around. So this actually brings up a thing about mental hygiene. In a sense, what do you want to be able to draw on? By the way, this is evidence that mental rehearsal, this is how mental rehearsal works. The idea, I'm sure you're familiar with it, the basketball example is the most famous one, where they had, now people don't realize they had 3 groups. They had one group that did free throws and did every free throw. And then another group that sat in the bleachers and just watched. And they had another group that did free throws until they had done one really exquisitely. Then they stopped. Now, this makes sense if you think about the mirror neurons. As soon as you had an event that was exquisite, then you would stop, then you'd sit down, and of course, when you go to rehearse what's there, what have you got? That last exquisite, wonderful example. And so you're rehearsing that example over and over. You're replaying that example as opposed to the person who's actually out there continuing to shoot free throws. Is that they're then getting every one of those, some are on, some are off, and so forth. Whereas the person, when they did the really good performance, stops, rehearses it, they're deepening, the brain is a neural net, they're deepening the attractor circuit, the neurons that are tied together for that particular behavior. Because that's the one they have in mind, and they repeat that and repeat that. Now, the interesting thing is, the people in the stands didn't improve. The people that actually threw the free throws, they improved. And the people that did this kind of systematic practice improved the most. But wait, Charles, you said that if you do it in your head, it's just like you were there and you did it. Ah, with this difference. That when you don't engage the connection between the mirror neurons and the long muscles, then that connection is still as rough as it ever was. In other words, athletes, going to the idea of representational systems, have more connections to do a certain sport. So the person who actually makes the connection between the mirror neurons and the long muscles and then rehearses that whole circuit is going to get more result than the person who's merely watching it and seeing, well, can I connect it here? Because they didn't actually do it. And by the way, it works in the other direction. If you take up a musical instrument, and there has to be that physicality, you can't just listen to music. You can listen to music, you can develop your auditory. It'll work. If you take up a musical instrument, holding violin, Steve was telling him about his kids, because his kids have gone to Waldorf schools, and the fix is in. We now know that playing physically, or guitar, whatever it is, playing a musical instrument, the connection between that muscle circuit and the brain literally builds brain cells. It goes in both directions. In other words, the imagining will influence the body, and the body, actually utilizing the body for certain things, can build up more capacity in the mind. The brain is much more plastic than they realize. Now, we knew this in NLP, but I'm sharing this with you because, well, as I was saying to the master trackers, they're going, can we use this stuff covertly? And I'm saying, look, you belong to a field. No, you too belong to a field where if you have the person who's feeling phobic, right? And they go, oh, elevators, and so they see the elevator, they're terrified or whatever it is. And you say, have them step out of the movie, watch the movie over there. So they watch themselves, right? Okay. Run it backwards. And step back in, and what happens? They're not phobic anymore. You belong to a field that if you think you're stepping into an imaginary circle, you get resourceful. Circle of excellence. If you don't tell people you're doing a technique, everything you do is covert. Because it's unbelievable. But what I'm sharing with you is some of the research that's showing not only is it believable, they're figuring out how it works. While that may not make it work better, it often supports you in the idea, yes, do this, and realize the difference things make. So the first difference I want to make this morning is to give you a launching point, a way of stepping from this program to wherever the hell you're going. One of the things we find, you also know about the research on people learning in a context. Learning is context dependent. All right. Again, studies, I don't know where they get the money for these. Somebody's got to let me know. I could use this money. A bunch of medical students, end of term exam, standard end of term, came into their classroom, take the exam. They had been asked, because of an experiment, psychological experiment, to leave an extra 3 hours after the exam. They said, fine, sure, we'll do that. We're game. We're medical We're going to be medical doctors someday. We're going to experiment on people. We understand this. So they came in and took their exam in the morning, went away, had some lunch, came back in the afternoon, and they were escorted over to that auditorium where the basketball experiments were going on. They sat them down in the bleachers and they handed them the same exam. And you know what happened? They scored between 20 and 40% less than they did in the classroom where they learned the material. This is called context dependence. And it's well verified. I'll give you one experiment of many. It's well verified. That means that this room here, given that we've done so many NLP trainings, is the place to do NLP. You just walk in this room and it will happen. The difficulty is that none of you are taking this room with you. But you could in your mind. And I do suggest that you consider that. I also consider that you suggest that you transfer those skills from here to where it is you want them to be. What we call what? Future pacing. Future pacing. It's like imagining yourself doing what you've done here in a context in the future. So what I want to start with this morning is some goal setting. That is to figure out what the hell one of you wants, or each of both of you, whichever. I want those skills to get where you want them to be. You spent all the time and effort and money here. So the idea is, what of these skills do you want where in your life? And to formulate that as a goal. All right? Now, we got some paper back there? We're going to have you do the Longman study. It actually is called the Longman study. The Longman study, often considered apocryphal, actually true, is where they had people from 3 American East Coast universities just after World War II. They got the graduates, they talked to them, they found out which graduates wrote down their goals for life and which ones had not, and they checked up with them after a decade as longitudinal study. The study included Ted Kennedy. If that influences your thinking, so be it. They had the people write down their goals. Now, in this case, I'm having you one goal at a time for the purposes of the exercise. It's an interesting thing. What you're doing is you're taking an internal dialogue and you're externalizing it. How many of you, if you're not sure of the spelling of a word, will write it down to see it more clearly? Yeah. Well, we're talking about the same thing here, is the idea that you're taking something, a thought, and by writing it down and putting it on the outside, you can see it more clearly. It also dissociates it from you, gives you a different perceptual position, and allows you to interact with it differently. Somewhere on that page, and I do suggest the top, the side, or the bottom, but not the middle. If you do use the middle, you'll find out why I suggested the top, the side, or the bottom in a few minutes. To write down a goal that you have coming out of this training. Now, what do we know about goal setting? We have the 5 conditions, yes? Stated in the positive, that should be the easy one at this point. I want to be able to, or I want to, or I'm going to, okay? And the second condition? Specific. Now, this gets trickier because people will often say something like, I want to utilize all my NLP skills. And I'm going, yes, this is a good idea. The thing is that if you go for all, that's such a generalization, your brain goes, all. You know, make me one with everything. Yeah, and mayo. But you want to specify. Now, there's an interesting way to specify that. Is, especially if you're talking about a state, a practice, a skill, is where do you want it to show up first? What part of the skill do you want to show up first? Remember that thing, the Erickson numbers, first, second, third, fourth? You can make a positive use of that by suggesting to yourself, okay, I'm thinking about going back to wherever it is I'm going to, and it might be my office, it might be my home, it might be my family, it might be my business, it might be my church. Context, right? What specifically of this skill do I want to show up? And here we go to sensory-based. You know, what do you want to see, hear, feel that'll let you know that you're starting to integrate those skills into your everyday life? Now, people say, but I don't want to just start. I'm going, but you do. Because if you're starting, that presupposes it'll keep going. That's the idea of the first, second, third, fourth. So you want to think about something that could be fairly easy for you to do, something you'd expect yourself to do, but you might not if you don't take this step. You'd expect that you'd build rapport with people when you see them. You'd expect you'd listen for their language, try to find out something about their model of the world. You might expect you'd notice their accessing cues or their voice tone or how they mark out certain words. But then again, if you don't actually do the future pace, you get back there and go, God, what happened that summer? Meanwhile, this room is filled with NLP resources. People walk in the room, they're changed, So we want to get that to where you're going to be. So writing down now, what is one of your goals? You probably had it since before the course. We're visiting it now because now you've got the skills in yourself. Let's take them to where you want them. So that's the idea, a goal of this course that will be evidence for you that you're beginning to integrate those skills into a specific context of your choosing, which is coming up next week maybe. So make a note, your words. All right. You got a few words there. Now, if you're writing a lot, and I have no objection to that, what you want to do is pick off a couple of words or a phrase or an image in that whole bit of writing that means that to you. In other words, you want to make it easier for your mind to keep in mind. It's like trying to quote some politicians these days. It's gone. We want a soundbite. In this case. But it's your soundbite. You pick it, not somebody else picks it. All right. As you finish that up, and it's just finishing up, making that thought of what it is, this goal, I want to remind you, gentlemen, that the women are smarter than the men. In this respect, is that the language part, the broca region, the language generating part of the brain is on one side in guys and a little bit on both sides for the women. This is why they hear tonality. They hear everything. Just so you're not too paranoid, okay? Good. It's just an encouragement to develop your acuity, because they have already. What I'm getting at here is that when you write down a goal, you are externalizing an internal dialogue. You're seeing it in a new way. You're interacting with it. You're reading it. And you're only using half your brain. It's a half-brain goal. The other side of the brain, which we take to be the creative part and all, well, really, it's about color. And it's about imagery. And about shape. And so in order to get a full brain engagement, why not? If you're going to have goals in your life, if you're going to want to future pace this, you want it to be there, you want to have both sides of your brain working, is for you to draw a picture that will in some way represent that goal for you. Now, before you do, let me offer you two comments. First, I come from Chicago. We have a museum there. They got these pictures from the Impressionists and Expressionists. This guy Picasso, it's like 3 eyes, 2 noses, They're great pictures to get you over any kind of feeling that you can't draw. I think this is one of his big points. It's like, I can draw, So the idea here is not the accuracy of the image, but that it evokes in you your goal. Right? So you could make it an actual picture. In other words, you could see yourself doing something, for example. On the other hand, you could also do something symbolic. You could draw a heart, or you could draw a sun, a tree, or something. In other words, for you, and I'm just giving, those are just my ideas, it's your ideas. When you read your goal, what idea or image comes to mind that if you drew that, which I'm going to suggest you render some kind of an image, again, you externalize that internal idea to some extent. And even though it won't be exactly like your internal pictures, or maybe if you're a trained artist and you have the eye-hand coordination, it will. That's possible too. But the idea is it doesn't need to be. All it needs to be is enough for you to get that feeling. You go, yeah, this represents my desire in this case. And by means of encouragement, for those of you that aren't quite with the program yet, the wealthiest trader in the world, dollar for dollar. That is to say that he's made more money for people than anyone else. He couldn't draw that well, so instead of drawing his goals, he would cut them out of magazines. He'd go through magazines and cut out pictures and make collages. he's only made maybe 5,000–6,000% on his money, but you can live on it. And again, it's understanding this above and beyond your everyday concerns. The idea of putting stuff out there for your brain to respond to. So that's what you're doing. You're creating something that you want to respond to. Not the media, not some company, not a relative, not even an old tape loop in your head. You can put all that aside and go, what would you like to be responding to more? How would you like these skills called NLP to show up in your life when you really return to it fully and completely? What we want to do is review the outcome well-formedness conditions. You can really tell this field's got jargon, well-formedness conditions. This is from linguistics. It simply means like a well-formed sentence, because a well-formed sentence is going to make sense. So for this sentence, which is directing your attention into the future, of course stated in the positive, initiated and maintained by self. Another way to put that in more ordinary language is you can do something about it. And it's not even that you can do all of it, but that you can, as we would say, keep the ball rolling. That you in some way. Now, this is problematic for some people. They say, well, what if it's about building rapport with somebody? You know, a relationship. Very often we have goals in a relationship, outcomes in a relationship, and they go, well, what if they don't want to build rapport with me? Well, what can I do? No. I'll tell you what. What's this? Well, no, I'll tell you a story about one of my teachers. She, anthropology major, university. She's assigned to work for a professor whom, of course, she has to take. To put it in the simplest language, he hates women. Yeah. And women shouldn't be in universities. They should be back in the home, back in the kitchen. Yeah, right. Her eyes were rolling too. But there she was. Young graduate student. What's she going to do? What she did is the following, is that she was in this office with this guy, and she would just breathe with the same breathing rate he did. While she did her other work, she was secretarial, and he's the important professor, you know. When he spoke to her, she would speak back in the same rhythm, in the same tones of voice. Not in the sense of copying, but if somebody speaks fast, you speak faster. If somebody's slower, you speak slower. Measured words, professorial words, she would do the same. She did this, and a couple of weeks passed, and he turned to her and said, you know, I generally don't like women in the academic professions, but I think it's good that we made an exception in your case. Yes, we are glad about that, aren't we? The idea is that even if that hadn't worked for her, but I share it because that kind of persistence does pay off, is that she was still learning more about building rapport and practicing it, even though the other person wasn't responding. So in other words, her goal of creating rapport was initiated and maintained by her. So she kept that for herself in that, instead of going, oh, well, what can you do, you know? It's like Erickson is like, well, what can you do? I wonder what we could do. Of course, this goal then needs to be sensory-based for two reasons. One, as Woody Allen says, you might not think a lot about the world, but it's the only place you can get a good steak. Yeah, and everything else that we would want. It's also the way that you get feedback loops going. In other words, if something is sensory-based, you can actually notice, am I getting closer or farther away from my outcome? If you don't have ways of sensorily measuring that, you can make up anything you want. But that's not actually going to get you to real goals, real differences in the world. Context specific goes again to the idea of where would you like this to show up first? Where specifically in your life would you like to begin to be practicing these skills, to be appreciating all the time and effort you've spent and noticing the changes in yourself and the people around you? Now, when I came into NLP long ago, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, these were the outcome conditions. Now, this was a heyday for NLP. We were flying first class, we were staying in fancy hotels. We were calling our friends and spouses back home, and we were getting divorces and relationships breaking up. And it was realized in all that something was missing. That is that we, being good Americans, had focused on our outcomes, what we wanted. and had neglected, not all of us, but enough that it was noticed, the larger context. We were doing this for a relationship, but honey, now I know I'm on the road 250 days a year, but I'm doing it for you. Yeah, it's really nice here in Hawaii. So the idea of ecology came into the picture. Now, to this day, some people, they like the word ecology or they don't like the word ecology, but they really think of ecology as some sort of constraint on your goals. I have this wonderful goal and now I have to keep other people, I would suggest instead that what you're doing is you're increasing the scope of your situation. You go, okay, now if I get this happening in my life, I know the effects, or I believe I know the effects around me, with me. You increase the scope, that is, you increase your picture, and you go, so how's this going to affect my friends, my coworker, my family? And if you need to, you utilize that information to refine your outcome. This is not the case of having to put it aside because of ecology, but with ecology it gets richer. I'm reminded of my colleague Gary Schmidt that what he decided is that certain times of the year his family would travel with him. And he would go and stay longer and make it a vacation, and he'd work for a few days in the city, and then his family, he and his teenagers, they'd go, and his wife, and they'd go out and see the city and do things like that. Well, was this more expensive? Yes. Did it make a better quality of life? Certainly. Because then they got a sense of what he was doing. They joined him in his life. They got to see new places. It's a very simple example, but it's the idea he discovered by that he actually had better outcomes than he had before. And there's also the willingness not only to look at the upsides, but to look at the downsides. That is, what happens when you get so busy and you're so in demand that you don't have time to eat or do your laundry or anything else? People do this in life without thinking about it. This is one of these strange things about our society, is that people choose careers without ever having stepped into the picture. A colleague of mine is a lawyer, and she says, I love the law, but I didn't realize that being a lawyer meant people yelling at you on the phone 70% of the time. People are always calling, because that's what you're supposed to do with lawyers, I guess, So there's that. There's about stepping into the picture. There's life before the goal, and there's life when you get the goal. So one of the ways I'm suggesting here of testing for ecology is that you step into that future and, as much as possible, take a moment or two or three and live it like the lawyer. And if you don't have rich enough representations, what do?
Change your goals.
No, you don't change your goals. You go out and get them. In other words, if you want to know about being a lawyer, if you want to know about setting up a consulting business, if you want to know about what it means to go back to college as an adult, if you want to know about married life, go buy these people a drink, take them for coffee, get a permission to show up at their office, and build a richer representation of what that will be like. Because you may find that you love the law, but you don't want to practice that kind of law. You want to do something else. You may find that you really like consulting, and you don't want to be the marketing person. These are good things to find out. There are many, many people in the world that want to do these other jobs. Let them. You go for the ones that you want to. And so in that sense, the ecology, both the idea of the expanding the scope, so there's yourself and you expand the scope in terms of the people, you can also expand the scope in terms of time. And you're looking at the positives, and you also look at the negatives so that you can come back and enrich that possibility. I'll give you an example from my experience, because I know it better than other people's, is that at the point that I went into consulting in the trading business, apparently it got the attention of some people, because some people that previously took little ads, they took little ads. After that, when I showed up, they were taking full-page ads. I realized the cost of those ads. I decided at that point that I was not going to advertise. I went in a complete direction. I said it's completely word of mouth. I did conferences, and I did word of mouth. And my income went up. and I wasn't marketing. Now, that seems contrary, but I had already decided that what did I want to do? Did I want to spend my time marketing myself, or did I want to spend my time doing the work? Now, you make your own choices, but my point in the example is that when I checked the ecology of that and I found out that most consultants spent 75% of their time marketing themselves, I went, no, that's not what I want to do. If I want to be a marketing person, I want to go into marketing. I decided I wanted to do it differently, and that caused me to revise how I went for my outcome, how I went for my goal, which turned out, and I did not know this at the time, I knew my experience would be better, but it actually turned out to be more beneficial than I thought it was going to be. This is the Joseph Campbell thing about following your bliss. You got to figure out what your bliss is and how you want it to show up, and realize that this is just one step. And when you realize that, it becomes a process you can keep revising as you discover more. All right? The first exercise this morning is that I want you to, each of you, with 2 others, get together and test for this, because you're still learning to do it. See, we do this really easily in everyday life. You go to lunch, you go, yes, I want lunch. I'm ordering lunch, or I'm telling somebody what to order and they're bringing it back. I will know whether it's fresh or, what I wanted or not, and I'm going to eat it in this reality. There's these considerations. Ecology, you go, well, if I have a big mass of French fried potatoes, I might not be awake this afternoon for this really cool exercise. Maybe I won't do that. When it's already in experience, people do this very easily, do it naturally. Where it gets screwy, and why we can actually get away with teaching it, is because when you step off of the everyday, when you start talking about things like success or career or rich, fulfilling relationships, those nominalizations begin to float. And people say, well, I really want a relationship, or I really want to make a difference. Well, how do you want to make a difference? I don't know. But they want to make a difference, and so the person's going around, am I making a difference? Am I making a difference? Example. In Chicago, and again, example because it works, we had a study group where we got together after we finished our practitioner training every Saturday at this psychiatrist's house. Didn't have to be a psychiatrist, but he was. We would practice different skills. Practitioner in the master track. And one of the people there, professor at a local university, and she was feeling very, very good about being a grandmother. This little daughter, her daughter was learning Spanish, her granddaughter was learning Spanish, English, and every time the little granddaughter learned a new word, she was thrilled. Sensory-based. On the other hand, she felt badly about how her NLP training had not turned into a book. She had this idea that she wanted to make a difference with the NLP. The way to do that, she thought, was to write a book, but she was too busy with the family, too busy with the classes. If you know anything about universities, lots of meetings, And so she didn't feel any fulfillment there. Well, my colleague Klaus and I, we look at her and we go, how's that possible? We said, how many students do you teach in a term? It was hundreds. And how many of the students do you teach NLP to? It was a little under 100. So each quarter of the year, you have all these people whose lives you've touched, who are now thinking about their lives differently, are setting goals differently, are approaching relationships differently. How can you think you're not having an effect in the world? Well, at that point, she realized she did have an effect in the world. And I bring up that example because she had a goal, and she thought she was maintaining it herself, but she forgot to have it context-specific and sensory-based. And when she saw those examples, then she could feel, and does feel now, fulfilled about those very positive and very important efforts she makes every term with those students. So that's really what we're up to here. It's not that people don't have big goals, it's how to make sure they make their way into the world. That's why that's so important. And it's why the ecology is so important as well. Into groups of 3, this is going to take maybe 15 minutes, not very long. What you're going to do is a show and tell. You're going to show the person your picture, and you're going to describe your goal. What are you going to do in the group? The first thing you do is appreciate. So, if we have the good picture, I may borrow a picture. We go picture, and you look and you go, ooh. All right? And then the person tells you about it, and you go, ah. Yeah. With sincerity. All right. Then you're going to, with rapport, and we will be watching, you are going to ask the person, you're going to listen to the goal, listen, is it stated in the positive? You might ask them, so what can you do about achieving this goal? Again, voice tone counts. What can you do about achieving this goal? No. What are you going to be doing to achieve this goal? And you're listening, do they have stuff? You'll ask about, is it sensory based? Or maybe you use real language and go, so what will you see, what will you hear, what you feel when you achieve this goal, or when you achieve this first step? And ask about, and where will you be, and who will be there? And help enrich their images, right? Because that's the other thing you're doing, submodalities. You're helping them to vivify that picture because that's going to make it more directional for them. And then you're going to do what? You're going to say, wow, that sounds wonderful. Are there any downsides? No, no downsides. Well, wait a minute here. What will this do about your time? Will you have the same free time? What about your friends? What about your family? How will this change your life over the next year or so? In other words, ask about ecology. And if they begin to go, then you can go, well, how could you make that goal even better by incorporating that? Yeah? Okay. Look around. Find yourself a couple of partners, and let's do it. I would suggest that the more important the goal, the more important the outcome, the more you check the well-formedness conditions. And the reasoning, again, is that the more important it is, the more likely it is to be abstract. The more likely it is that you're going to want it to pertain to a large amount of time. And therefore, the less likely it is that you're going to be thinking about specifically where it might show up, or specifically about the consequences. You know, those of you that have done, whether psychotherapy or coaching or just wanted to help a friend, know that very often people will take whatever it is and they'll take their negative and phrase it in the positive. They'll go, well, you know, I don't want to be alone anymore. And they go, okay, what do you want? Well, I want to be in a relationship. And so it's a sense of opposite as opposed to what it is they would really like. You go on to Master Practitioner, you're going to discover something called meta-programs. You're going to realize that it's deeply rehearsed in the person's experience to state what they don't want. And if it is, that's what they'll do. They're a lot of fun. You say, well, what do you want? Well, I don't want this, and I don't want that, and I don't want that, and I don't want that. And I don't want this, and I don't want this, and I don't want this. What do you want? And they'll actually say, well, I know I don't want. John Grinder's strategy. Hey, Didu, what do you want? You know, what if it came up and bit you on the ass? You kind of do like that, you know, just to get them going. But an alternative to that is to pace and lead. So you don't want this, and you don't want this, and you don't want this, and you don't want that, and you don't want that. And if you didn't get all those, what would you want to be getting? Sometimes you need to do a little of that. Again, people are going to go global, and this is where you can do that magic thing. You can say, okay, well, what would be the first step? What would let you know you were on the path, that you were on your way? Because, of course, that's a feedback loop. You can get that to be sensory-based in terms of a well-formed outcome. This also can be taught to have huge life-changing, society-changing goals. And still, what's going to show up in the world that's going to be steps on the way to that? Having done that, we have a very simple model in NLP, which is about that gap. The gap between where we are now and where we want to be. And of course, being a field with jargon, we have to have words for it, called present state, desired state. It's in that gap that we get curious. You ask the person in question. Now, the way it's taught in the book is to ask, most of the books as a matter of fact, What stops you? You're at a point in your training that I want you to hear that if I ask you, what elephant? What do you do? Momentarily, you've got to think of it if you understand it. If you don't understand it, if it's from some other language, wakarimasu ka? Hai, wakarimasu. Osh. Well, now the thing is, if you didn't understand what I said, you'd grab the tonality, da-da-da-da-da, and it's probably a question. And you'd grab the context. In other words, we're always trying to make meaning. So if I ask you, you've got this goal, you're here, you've got this goal, what stops you? What are you going to momentarily imagine? Yeah, even if there's nothing stopping you, you can come up with something.
Right.
This could be called you're creating difficulties for the client. You don't need to. So I have a couple other proposals here, because we're getting to the integration. One of those proposals goes to the idea, do you know how you got here? The answer is yes, by the way. Do you know how you got here specifically this morning? Do you know how you happen to be in this training this summer of your life? And you could describe, relative to the amount of time and detail requested, what that is. You'd say, well, I heard about this NLP stuff, and, I read a book, I saw a tape, people said this is the training to go to. You can tell me that path you took. Right up to the present. And then it gets a little spotty for some people. And then there's going home, and then there's going back to work, and then there's and so forth. But if you look back, it's a very complete path. So one of the ways to fill in this gap is to go back out to that future. And instead of trying it on, well, you are trying it on, and you're feeling it, and you get into it, and go, yeah, that's where I'm going to be. And when you're in that state, look back and see how you got here. Because the brain is a tricky thing. It will fill in those steps for you. Or a number of them anyway. Because we're very good at looking back on things and seeing how we got somewhere. It's that looking forward thing that throws us off from time to time. And then what you can do is step out, and you can re-walk those steps back to where you are now. And step back in and turn and see those steps leading to that future. And you can see what would be the first step now that would let you know you're on that path of those steps. Now, for those of you interested in language patterns and so forth, there's a number of behavioral presuppositions here as well. By going out and looking back as if it's already happened, because you do the same thing, you look back on your past, it's happened, you're in a sense saying to your brain, it's happened. But then you come over here and go, it hasn't happened. Well, it's happened, but it hasn't happened. Yeah, like a lot of experience, right? Like a number of you are going to go to DIA, the airport, and you've been there before, and now you're going to go back. And even if last time was the first time, this time it's more familiar. So it's easier to navigate. Just like when you first were learning to drive a car, at least for most of you, it was complicated and all those things to do. Now you get in a different vehicle and you go, oh yeah, that's familiar. So the idea is by doing this, you're making this future already familiar, which makes it easier to do. Yeah. How about that? So, can you guess what the next exercise is? Now, why are we chunking it this way? Because you want to make sure the outcome's well formed before you start laying these kind of tracks. If the person goes, what do you want to change? I want to change everything! And they go out there and I've changed everything! And they look back and they go, but I didn't, this is it. Whereas if you say, well, what I want to do is go in and really apply this anchoring stuff Because that, I know if I do that, the other stuff will come. And so I've got this place in my future, and I'm utilizing the anchors. People are responding, and I'm noticing the feedback, and you go out and you go, yeah, I'm doing that. And how did I get there? Oh yeah, I took that course, and and at the airport, actually, I saw this, I built rapport, and I matched their anchor, and other things begin to fill in. Oh, and I told people about it, and I showed them, and when I showed them things, whatever fills in for you. And there'll be some gaps, but now there's smaller gaps, all right? And you step out, you walk back, step back in the present moment, and then see, okay, what's going to let me know that I'm on the way? Whichever foot you like to go, okay? Yeah. Getting off on the right foot, yeah? Okay. So, you set this up with your partner, you got the present state, have them look to where the goal is. All right, so now I have to tell the NASA story, going to the moon. So long ago. Yeah, just after dinosaurs roamed the earth, we went to the moon. Yeah. Well, the deal about going to the moon that we want to focus on is this, is they were where they were supposed to be. We're talking about they're leaving the earth. And they're going to this object going at high speed called the moon. You want to get there, right? And they are where they're supposed to be how much of the time? They are where they are supposed to be.
70%? Every moment.
They are where they're supposed to be 3% of the time. 97% of the time, they're a little off or a lot off from where they're supposed to be. There's a lesson in this. The idea of going for a goal is the idea that you've got a direction, not that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The idea is, do you have direction? Do you have trajectory? In other words, you're on the way to the goal and you get a little off track, or you get a little, and the point is that you bring yourself back on track. At least that's the point I'm taking from that story at this point. Is that we humans do this funny thing where we think if we're not right where we're supposed to be, then we're in the wrong place. Now, pulling a souffle out of the oven, yes, you better be there on the moment. But there's a whole lot of other things in life where there's a lot more play. And in fact, being off course can let you know to be on course. You ever been driving down a road and you just kind of get tired and you daydream and then you hit a speed bump? Wakes you right up. In a sense, when we get off course, when the world catches it, in some sense, for a few of us, it reminds us to pay attention. So you want to be careful about how you're evaluating your journey on the way. Remember, you can get to the moon and back and not be in the right place at the right time as long as you're going in the right direction and you're making course corrections. Yeah, it's a pretty significant learning, and I don't know that the metaphor does it, but it's a beginning. I'll also tell you this, that most of you will not get the goal that you made the picture of. Well, I probably shouldn't have told you that.
3% only will get.
No, not about that, Amal. What I'm talking about is that what happens is on the way to the goal, you have additional learnings. You have additional experiences. You don't think about it, but you start to revise that goal. Maybe it gets better. It's the idea that the goals are a way of directing your attention. Keep in mind that if some of these people in Silicon Valley had gotten exactly what they wanted, they'd be running a $100 million company. If you know what the public offering for Google is, then you get the idea how much bigger it can be. That's only a monetary example. It's the same kind of thing. It's like you're going along in life and you think you're developing this skill, and then you realize, wow, this applies to interacting with my family. Or, wow, I'm thinking in a new way that I didn't even know to anticipate. And so your goals revise and they get richer. And that's the way it ought to be, because it's dynamic. The other thing I want to point out about these steps along the way comes again from my experience in the finance area, is that I worked with guys and gal, that's what we say, ladies We'd say gentlemen and lady. Typical finance seminar. And the colleague and I had a plan. What we were going to do is do a seminar on how to make lots of money. Only then we were going to covertly teach relationship strategies. And then we were going to do a relationship seminar and then covertly teach finance strategies. We thought this is... Because people tend to want to go for what they know to develop, rather than developing something completely different. We'll be getting to that. The thing about that I noticed about the people who were in the finance, who were young traders, going for the gold, going for the $1 million, is they would make that the measure. By that, they would end up whipping themselves and forcing themselves and very often burning themselves out because they didn't see that some of those places along the path could be rewards. Those could be milestones, if you will. Markers. We have, for those not from this country, we have markers that let you know the mile you pass, a kilometer, perhaps in your country. There's things along the way. So in the trading business, learning to run the computer, learning the process of placing orders, mastering your technique. I mean, there's ways you can go, yeah, I did that. And in the same way, on the way to your goal, that first thing you're doing today, yeah, you're doing something. Feel good about that. And there are other places where you can go, yeah, I've got this piece of it, or I've got a handle on this. And so you reward yourself, and it becomes easier. The idea when we set goals is not to set one big goal. You want to set near-term goals, because this encourages a person to continue to set goals. You want to set some medium-term goals, because then there's different levels of reward. It keeps you going.
So like if you have a long-term goal, very big, chunk it smaller, and get the...
Find some natural milestones or some natural, I hate the word mini goal. It's not a word. But find some places along the way where you've actually got a bit of it. You're like, I got that part. So what we've done here is we set up a present state and desired state space. The explorer went into the desired state, experienced it fully, looked back either in the mind's eye or physically in the mind's eye, because of course there's nothing there, it's all in the mind's eye, found how they'd gotten from the desired state to the present state. The explorer then dissociated, that is, became an observer on the experience, and viewed that path, saw those steps. Explorer steps into the first step, what's going to make a difference, get them on the path, determines that first step to be completed today. You could also see this as an elaborate form of future pacing. Future pacing is you see yourself doing something. You see yourself doing a lot of some things here. So the next thing, in terms of Diltz's idea that we have a present state, we have a desired state, and to get from one to the other, you want resources. Now, I haven't written the word in there till now because most people think of resources as states. That you want a state of go for it, a state of curiosity, a state of confidence, a state of excitement. You want to be in a state of competence in your skill and bring all that skill to it. That is correct. And I would suggest that the ability to look back and have those steps appear is also a resource. It just doesn't have the flair of the resource state, but it is part of programming your brain, organizing yourself to get where you want to go in life. So now we do want to go to that more traditional meaning of resources. That is, and here's the question I would suggest you ask, what's between your present state and your desired state? As in, not what stops you. What's between? Now, right now, you know what's between is all these steps, yeah? Now, some of those steps, you might not know something about, you might want more resources in those steps, and some of those steps might actually be something that stops you, yeah? We're not going to that yet. Is this another easy thing to do? What are we doing? Doing a variation on a circle of excellence, on placing an anchor. Bless you. And you too. Because we are people, creatures, with all the resources we need. But I'm unhappy with the word need. We're with all the resources we could need or want, and very often more than we can imagine. Because you think back on certain moments when something incredible happened and you had some feeling or some insight or ability, and it's still there. And we know from the mere neuron ideas now, we know from our experience in NLP, if you go back to that moment and vivify it, then your neurology has it, and then you can take that around and bring that into the moment or moments where you want it to be there. Now, what are you doing? You're taking the V and the A, the visual and auditory of this steps, and you're bringing this new K in, and you're making new experiences that you're going to be having. But you already had them. So it's going to be easier to have them. Aren't we clever creatures? All right. So this exercise, you've just seen it, is with your partners again, is that you set it up. Now they've got steps from here to there. And then you can say, well, what's between here and there? And they might say, well, a lot of steps. You know, they're going to, in other words, going to have some reaction. And then you're going to say, so what resource, what emotional state, what idea, what kind of skills, if you had them present here, would make this so much easier, so much more enjoyable? And if they pick something like discipline, then you want to go, okay, discipline. Well, let me ask you, you know, what will this, you know, the discipline, being able, what will that do for you? Right? You want to get to, remember the idea of chunking up. You know, what's important about discipline? What will discipline do for you? You were looking for something bigger. Because they're going to want to do it the way they've done it. And you're there to offer something new and different. That's the whole idea of this interaction, the explorer and the guide. So if they want, I want confidence. You know, and well, what's confidence going to do? You know, it's going to make me feel it's possible. He says, when was a time in your life? Because if you got yourself here, you've had experiences in your life where nothing could stop you. It's like you saw something and you just went for it. What if that experience were present here? Or what if it were, as you were saying, humor, pixiness, playfulness? It's a different way of understanding a resource. Instead of like, well, I need more discipline. And I'm thinking, yeah, that would probably work. And what's going to make it easier? What's going to make it more enjoyable? What's going to make it a delight to interact with this? And you talk and you have the voice tone, right? Because the voice tone carries. So you're talking to the person too, and you look at them and you go, oh, I bet you know how to make good trouble. Yeah. And he goes, yeah, I do. I had a few of those experiences. Okay, be a little ecological, you know. What would be appropriate? That playfulness. Because you can always take the state, you know. The curiosity. What's around the next corner? When you've got that, have the person go back, get the state, of course, you're calibrating, two in your group. They glow a little bit, you go, good. You go, now, take that with you. Step off, come around, and put that right into the moment on that path, on those steps where you want it. And if they look at you like, hey, wouldn't have more steps? Then you say, okay, now that it's there fully and completely, go ahead and carry it forward, noticing how it makes your journey so much easier, more delightful, and worthwhile. Or words to that effect. The question there is about how a specific kind of goal can actually get you in trouble. Right? And this is where, you know, what is the purpose of that goal? This goes to the other dimension, if you will. The idea that we've been talking about the future out here, we indicating the past. We've had people step out into an observer position. The thing is that people do this kind of thing all the time anyway, right? Well, think about it. I mean, people, they'll project, oh, I wonder what I'll have for lunch, go into the future. People will go, oh yeah, that restaurant like that was really good. You know, even for lunch, they're flipping around in time. They're in the experience, or they're watching the experience from the outside, going, and then stepping back in, or somebody tripped, and they get that person's feelings. And people don't realize they're doing all these changes so quickly, and that they add up to what we call strategies. One of the ways by physicalizing it, getting a person to experience those differences. The mat, we have the Tremurti mat here, is another effort at creating a physicalization. The idea that when you've done this, the person goes, okay, well, here's where you're in your own body, and here's where you go back to the past, and here's where you're planning for that future, and you go into that future. For many people, it's very useful to sort that out. If the person has a kinesthetic leaning, then doing the timeline work, doing the walking we were doing this morning is very useful. And I'm sure a number of you noted that Judy did less walking, although she certainly looks capable. She did it in her mind's eye, her mind's ear, her mind's body. You can do that as well. In fact, it used to be with NLP that we taught it all by sitting down. That people would do these things. It's just when we physicalized them and brought them out like this, it became easier for people to understand and appreciate. You've got the dimension of time. We got the dimension of other people and observer. You're talking about the next dimension here. And the next dimension up is about importance. What's important about making $1 million? The idea that people can become too attached to a particular outcome and forget that those outcomes are only there because they represent the fulfillment of certain criteria. Now, what's important about $1 million? I'll have you be him for a moment. We'll just play a
Well, from what
role play.
I know of him, I think it's just something.
What's his name? Give me a name. Doesn't matter.
All right, Kieran. His name's Kieran.
Kieran, what's important about being a millionaire?
I think for him it was just he just made the thing in his mind of having $1 million, period. I mean, that was success to him, I think.
All right. And what is it that makes $1 million success?
From what I know of this guy,
Sure.
I think he can retire or something. I think is what he thinks.
Okay, and what's important about retiring? Being able to retire when you want?
Maybe doing what you want.
So what's important is being able to do what you want. Is this familiar? Mm-hmm. Yeah, is it the Virginia Satir example? Mm-hmm. You know that one where the young daughter is being brought in to Virginia? The father is dragging her in. The daughter is got the earrings and the clothes, and you kind of wonder if there's a tattoo under the shirt kind of thing. And it says, well, what's going on here? And it says, I want her to mind. And of course, you can see this daughter, she's not going to mind. And so Satir, building rapport, goes, well, what's important about her minding? Well, she'll know the right thing to do. The daughter's going, Satir continues, what's important about knowing the right things to do? Well, you'll get on in the world better. Oh, so you want her to get on in the world better? Well, yeah, I'm her dad. And what's important about her getting on in the world better? Well, I want her to have a good life. Daughter's starting to look now, huh? Goes the next one, and why would you care if she has a good life or not? Dad tears up. Because I love her. This is about detach. It's a very important skill set here. That's the other side of the goal setting. Because goal setting is being very specific and getting sensory-based and getting into behavior. You also want the flexibility to go, well, why bother to go for that desired state? Because it has attached to it, stated or not, certain values that this person you're talking about holds dear, that other people hold dear. It's the fulfillment of those criteria, those values, we use those words interchangeably, that the person experiences when they get the goal. And also, they don't experience if they don't get the goal.
Yeah, because he seems always disappointed that he never, he didn't take in all the other things into consideration when he was 16, but he still has that, and every time he thinks about it, he gets disappointed.
Mm-hmm. And I understand, and this is a rumor, this is secondhand information I'm getting, so it would be, it's certainly, long distance, coaching here if I were to suggest anything. I would say, though, that it's about what I said earlier about goals help us set directions. They get us moving in life in a certain direction. And with that direction, we encounter experience. And then, if we're awake and alive, we can revise our goals based on new information. Or as I've often noted, that what were your goals when you were 5 years old? And did they change by the time you were 15? We'd imagine a few of them changed, and even more of them changed by the time you were 25. Those changes are personal or social. At 15, it was like the opposite sex, which was either ew or huh. At 25, a different relationship. At 35, you might be concerned about raising your own children and how they're going to deal with that transition. And so we are presented with all these opportunities to apply ourselves and make a difference and experience incredible things. And that, to me, is what goals help us to do, closer to our heart's desire. For some people, it's a fast boat. For some people, it's a ticker tape and having a lot of other people ask them their opinions. For other people, it's being able to go for a walk in the woods when they want. Having said that kind of thing, the next step is to get the person to appreciate that all these efforts that you just made, that you set up the spaces again, you ask what's between you and your desired state, and that answer you utilize to select a resource state, had the person go back and get that resource state, bring it around to that future and put it where they want it, and then spread it to other future moments as desired, that all of that effort is actually in service of these criteria.
I need to keep finding these excerpts from Charles. Absolutely great stuff. Applicable to anyone and everyone. That was not just for trading, that is for everyone. Investing, entrepreneurism, venture capital, I don't care. That's relevant to all of us. And one quick reminder. Go ahead and take the time. Write that review. Covel.com/iTunes. That's COVEL.com/iTunes. Give me a review of this podcast. Say something positive. Send me an email, michael@covel.com. After you write the review, I will send you a trend following CD of extras. And please check out Charles Faulkner online, easily found at charlesfaulkner.com. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.